That went back to when I was a college student. My interest in meditation began when I was about 20. I was at the university studying physics and was at a kind of end crisis with that study. I'd been a good student, but it seemed more I studied, rather than getting the closer to the truth I was looking for, it was seemingly more and more abstract, less and less pertinent to life, less and less true, except in a minor kind of academic sense. And before dropping out, which I was about to do, which was a dangerous thing in those days because that was the Vietnam War period, so in the United States you would go into the army and off you went to the Vietnam War. I talked with a physics professor who was also a meditant, and he was one of my teachers in the university, and as a consequence, when I came in, we talked about how poorly I was doing, explained why. And then, ironically, he told a children's fairy tale, and then subsequently introduced me to the writings of Rudolf Steiner and meditation. So from about 21 until now, I'm 63 now, I've been practicing more or less all the time, every day. So it's been a long-term part of my life. Born out of personal crisis, but then became increasingly a way to, what would you say, not only deal with the equanimity issues, the issues of how does one restore balance and direction in a life, but also how does one combine science, in my case physics, with the inner life. So my direction has been less around well-being, which is the focus of this meeting, less around mindfulness per se, which my friend Jon Kabat-Zinn basically invented, and more about meditation as a form of inquiry, of discovery, about the nature of the self, the nature of the world, and in that way to reduce suffering. You know, even in Buddhism, the primary source of suffering is ignorance. That's the primary source. I mean, there are all sorts of secondary effects. But if you want to get at the root cause of suffering, then you have to dispel the delusions and ignorance which we live inside of. So that makes a great conjunction to science. You know, science is about knowing, but now in this case, a form of knowing which leads to not dead forms of understanding, but you might say living forms of insight. I think of it as insight as opposed to knowledge. Knowledge has a more conventional, mechanistic, and even reductionist character. Insight is a personal lived experience where you move into and animate with your imagination a direct encounter with the meaning, structures, patterns of the natural world, of the human psyche, and so on. So it's a much more direct apprehension. You know, it's the difference between writing an equation on the blackboard and all the students going and writing it down, and seeing it for the thousands of things that equation contains. You know, the myriad phenomena that are encapsulated in that little script. And that moment of apprehension, when you go from confusion to, you know, and you can do that inwardly in contemplative practice as well, through what I call a contemplative inquiry process. So that's been my journey.
If I come and visit your workplace at Mind and Life Institute, how will I notice that you practice mindfulness in that workplace?
Well, if you come to our Monday morning staff meeting, you'll find that somebody reads a poem or a meditation to the group, strikes the bell, then we drop into silence for the next 5 minutes, and then he or she will strike the bell again, typically 3 times, to call us out of the bell meditation and the silence. And then each day around 11, you'll hear a little bell go off and someone walk around to all the offices and invite anyone who could care to and has the time to sit together for 15 minutes. You'll also experience in the decor and the things that are on the walls and the objects that are there, a kind of container for the work that is kind of a sanctuary-style, silent presence that continually reminds us of the work we're doing and its connection to these contemplative dimensions of life.
So you think that we need symbols
I think it
around
really
us
helps.
to inspire us to go inwards?
I think it's really important, the container that inside of which you work, the color of the walls, the things you hang on the walls, the way you present, you might say, yourself and your work through not just what you're saying, but what you're surrounded by. It doesn't mean you have to have an ordered desk. You can be busy and have your own individual space and so forth, but that it's mindful. Mindfulness is not just about the breath, all right? It's about life. And so the space in which you live and work should also be mindfully appointed. First, you have to establish trust. Because people will be wondering, what's behind this? What's the boss up to? What are they trying to get out of me? So there's, at least in America, distrust is the prominent. If something new comes in, why? So that means establishing trust, which means making yourself vulnerable, which means the boss has to do these practices, not just delegate that. So they sit.
And then
they spend the time in silence. They undertake the practices, the walking practices, and so forth. And then they see that this is something which lives authentically at the top of the organization, that it's really not a hierarchical thing. You should be doing this in order that we can get more productivity out of you, less disgruntled employees, better for the bottom line. But this is a value of the whole organization. So that's establishing trust. And then people, you can then do the decor. I think that's all nice, but that's the outer piece. But it has to first live inside. My take on many of these things is that things like diet and things like the space in which you live, it's primarily, the first place of work is yourself and your relationships, and then it just starts to radiate out. The world around you is changed as a reflection of the transformations within. You can also have a kind of spiritual materialism where you think you're going to buy your way into heaven, so to speak, by the pretty pictures you put on the wall. Right? The pictures that come onto the wall will be a natural expression of the mindfulness that's in your heart. I tend to think that each person has their own step, that it's not one thing to be done in concert, sort of military fashion, that we all agree to the battle plan kind of a thing. But rather that each person, according to their life, according to their destiny, according to their opportunity, takes what is given to them. So, if it were you asking me, and I knew you a little better, I would respond to you. If it's unders, I would respond to unders. If it's me in relationship to this, I would know myself. So it's each person trying to presence their future with the confidence that there is a way of combining those futures through what I call spiritual friendships, that you knit together a kind of social architecture, that the architecture is no longer made of buildings and stones and cathedrals, that the buildings of the sacred work that's to be done, the mindful work that's to be done, the new society that's to be built, is a community that's based on human relationships that are increasingly ones of trust and ultimately of friendship, which is in some ways one of the greatest and most beautiful forms of love that we can offer to one another. To be truly a friend, especially a friend in this contemplative sense of the word friendship. Start with the 15-year-old. They're not really threatened by much. That they're wanting to take risks. They want to go out a little bit on a limb. They want to take a chance. They want to explore life. Invite them in. Their parents, their grandparents, will learn from them, and as they become 20-year-olds and then 25-year-olds, they'll have that in their bones, they'll have it in their breath, they'll have it in their attitude towards life. And, in physics, we had quantum mechanics, and it was a big revolution, right? And it was a challenge to all the classical traditional notions of science. And the old guard was defending the old paradigm, tooth and nail. They were there to continue to think and understand the world in the old way. And I think it was Niels Bohr who said, you know, progress proceeds by funerals. In other words, that eventually those who can't make the transition, they're gone. So you're sorry to see them go, but if that's that. So I would invest more in the young. You know, don't fight a losing battle. Now that being said, you know, mindfulness is for everyone, and one can always communicate it better. But people sometimes just are trenchant in their obstinate resistance. There's nothing you can say. So you have to be able to judge, is there anything I can do or say? I can give them the scientific evidence. I can give them the mechanisms in the brain that are going to be neuroplastically affected. I can show them the hard data for outcome studies. I can relate it to their own Christian or Asian traditional belief systems. Will it make a difference to them? And if the answer is no on all those kind of counts, then you thank them and go elsewhere. You know? And never burn your bridge, always thank them. Never treat them with disrespect, because you may find that they become your strongest ally in the future. You know, so care for them still, but you're probably going to be giving most of your attention to the places where you have the possibility for establishing companionship, community, and the development of this whole work, which is the young.